Well, good evening and welcome to this episode of the Iowa blog. This is Family Hour. I'm here with Kirk and with Kevin this evening. We're going to have two purposes of this program, gentlemen. The first is actually going to begin in Yeshaya 17 because I would like to address what I think is the result of the Trumpsters' plan for Gaza. And then we will turn to our review of Shabbat, this upcoming harvest, because it is the only way to escape what's coming. So, gentlemen, if we begin with Yeshaya 17:1 and understand that 17 and 18 all tell a cohesive story in Yeshaya. 17 begins with the fall of the Assyrian government, which we witnessed quite recently, with a Islamic terrorist group that once called themselves the Islamic State. And we'll speak to what the Islamic State represents in a moment. Having overthrown the Assad government. This was something that was heretofore almost unimaginable, and yet it happened just 2 months ago, and yet it was predicted 2,700 years ago by the prophet Yeshaya. So we're going to start there, and we're going to follow the course of events as Yeshaya explains what is going to happen in Syria and in that greater region, and how that is going to lead to what is obviously the two-state dissolution, the imposition of a terrorist state of Islam carved out of the heart of Israel, which narrows the country at the waist, any application of a Islamic State carved out of Israel will narrow the country to less than 5 miles wide, where 70% of the population live. And so I want to go through that and explain how those things relate to the timing of this Shabbat harvest, since this program is also episode 14 of the Katsir harvest on Shabbat. And once we have a little bit of background there, I want to turn to this dark circus that Donald Trump is running, where I am quite certain that he cannot be as insane as he sounds.
Right.
And therefore, someone that insane could not win an election once, much less twice, to become president of the United States. So we are in a position where we have to explain what it is that he's trying to achieve. And I think I've known this for some time, and I want to share the details specifically of what Donald Trump is trying to achieve and how he's playing his cards. So the first part of this program, and it may turn out to be most all of the program, is going to be very difficult for Israelis to take. And yet this program, the whole Yahweh blog, the entire purpose of it is to speak directly to God's people, to call them back home, to reintroduce them to Yahweh's name, to reacquaint them with their Messiah, who will eventually make all of this right, but it will be for a very small remnant of Jews who live today, because all of this is coming to a head in very short order. So what I'm going to say is not going to be happy news, but it is nonetheless irrefutable. If you were to run the percentages on Yahweh's prophets, particularly as notable as Yeshaya, Isaiah, being right, I'm quite certain that the number pegs at 100%.
Right.
So what I'm sharing with you is inevitable. And it's not inevitable because God wants it to be so. It is inevitable because God predicted it. It isn't inevitable because Yahweh is manipulating things behind the scenes to achieve the result that he predicted long ago. It isn't any of those things. It's because as a spiritual being, Yahweh exists akin to light, which is what he wishes to enable in us through these Moed Mikre, particularly on Shabbat. And as light, time simply exists. And when time exists, you're able to maneuver in it. You're able to see the past at any time, and you're able to witness the future at any time. So Yahweh was able to witness the future of humanity thousands of years ago, and therefore show it to his prophets so they could write down what is essentially future history. Because these things that Yahweh is revealing are the substance and the conclusion of man's choices, most of them bad. So this is how Yahweh goes about prophecy. It's why he is the only one who can do it. He is able to view our future in our past and then have his prophets write it down so that when it occurs, we have not only been forewarned, but it helps us make reasoned decisions as we approach these things. And of course, its primary purpose is it affirms not only Yahweh's existence, but that he inspired the words that we are reading as God.
Mhm.
Yashaya, Isaiah 17:1. And one last thing before I say this.
Yeah.
We're only going to take this probably through the seventh statement in today's program. And on previous programs and future programs, we'll deal with all of 17 and 18. Because 17 and 18 eventually devolve into a horrid war for Israel. This is where this leads. There will be more Muslims flooding into Israel than there are bullets in the possession of the entire IDF. Millions of them. It would be 1,000 times worse than what happened on 10/7. And it's inevitable. And the very things that Trump is arranging would make it inevitable. And so in our near future, and I think sometime in 2027, there will be a tsunami of Islamic jihadists invading Israel, and they will be much more vicious than they were even on 10/7. And that this, because of the way that the various powers of the world are positioned, with China and Russia and in league with Iran and the Shiite Muslims, the United States and Europe in bed with Saudi Arabia and the Sunni Muslims, that this is going to lead to World War III. It's going to be exactly what the world experienced with Neville Chamberlain when he gave Adolf Hitler the high ground of Czechoslovakia. And that peace in our time led directly to war in the next moment. And you need to know that there is really very little difference between Islam and Nazism. It is Islam that was responsible for the Holocaust. All Hitler wanted to do was exile Jews. It was the Grand Mufti who convinced him not to exile them, but to exterminate them instead. And in Goddamn Religion, which is 5 volumes, articulating the Quran set in chronological order and set into the context of Muhammad's life using the most revered and oldest, most credible hadith sources. Yeah, it is quite obvious that there is essentially no difference between Islam and Nazism. I devoted 100 pages to juxtaposing quotes from Mein Kampf and the Quran in the book just to prove that point. So this is where we are headed. Jews need to be aware of it. The last thing I wanted to share is that in Isaiah 18, there are some 30 very detailed depictions of the nation most responsible for making Israel vulnerable to this war and leading the world to world war. And those depictions all describe one country, the United States of America. And so we have long known that the United States would abandon Israel at this time. I've been writing on this now for 20 years. So what I did not know who would be president at the time that the abandonment would occur. But because it is Donald Trump, there is no question now that he is the next Neville Chamberlain. He is the person who is going to betray Israel. And Again, I don't say that because I'm a partisan, as you guys know. I am
Right.
apolitical.
Mhm.
I'm opposed to all political parties. I will criticize them all with aplomb. But I am a student of the prophets. I know what they say, and therefore the conclusions here are obvious. Okay, with that introduction, a prophetic pronouncement and timely declaration regarding the removal of the tremendous burden of Damascus. Behold, Damascus is revolting and corrupt, degenerate and unrestrained, and will be removed from inhabited cities. It will actually become a twisted and tangled heap of collapsed structures, fallen buildings, and rubble. 17:1. There are lots of times when I'm on X that you see pictures of a completely ruined metropolis, and our first reaction is this must be of Gaza, but it isn't. It's of Damascus. There are huge swaths of Damascus that lay in ruins, and that's going to increase. And it's going to increase for a number of reasons. One of which is that Israel is in a very difficult position right now. It has failed miserably in Gaza. It has manufactured more Islamic jihadists than they have killed, and they have turned Gaza into rubble. Which how can you blame them based upon what the Gazans inspired and perpetrated on 10/7?
Mhm.
And they had no choice in the sense that the Islamic terrorists that perpetrated those attacks brought Israeli captives back into Gaza, and they hid them as well as their weapons in mosques and hospitals and schools and their children's bedrooms. And so there really was no choice if you're going to go after them. And if you just destroy the underground network of tunnels, the buildings above them are going to crumble. And so this is what has happened. But while Israel has proclaimed that their intent is to wipe out Hamas so that Hamas no longer exists and cannot rule Gaza, it's had the opposite effect, and that goal is impossible. And I know that Israelis are very proud of their response to 10/7, even though their first 18 hours was abysmal. That is not what has happened. Hamas is no weaker in Gaza now than they were before, and if anything, they have more control because there's less options for the people and there's no place to hide. So Israel now knows that Syria is being run by the Islamic State, and that as much as Israel hated the Assad regime, the group that has replaced them is far worse. It's just like when the United States
Mhm.
went into Afghanistan, we left it in worse shape than we found it. When we went into Iraq, we left it in far worse shape than we found it. When we went into Libya, we left it in far worse shape than we found it. We have a tendency to do this. And now that Syria is in the hands of an Islamic terrorist organization, Israel really has no choice but to try to preclude that group from amassing against it. And that's why they continue to have infiltrated Syria and are occupying that border region with them. And by the same token, Turkey has pushed much further into Syria in their goal to exterminate the Kurds. And you still have a Russian presence there. You still have an American presence there. And all of this, Kirk, as you know, is a direct result of the United States. The United States wanted to create this civil war in Syria. Our CIA prompted this civil war in Syria, and we thought we could get away with it because the CIA is big into regime change, and they thought this would cause a regime change, and this is what they wrought on the world. And of course, it fundamentally changed the world because there have been millions of refugees fleeing these Islamic countries like Libya and Syria and Afghanistan, and they have gone to Europe and to America. They have brought the plague of Islam with them, and they have crippled those countries and made it very difficult to exist as a Jew in any of those countries. All right, so the first part of this tells us what we know, that Damascus is already in the process of becoming a collapsed city of fallen buildings. This then reads, abandoned and damned, destroyed and deserted will be the inhabited and terrorized regions of anguished cities filled with disgusting religious temples and shrines, as well as wrathful donkeys of Auror, the repudiated outcasts and repugnant refugees of the Arnon Valley, which is in Ammon, Jordan. This is part of the Trump plan that we will have to discuss here in a moment. But he wants to move 1 million of the Gazans into Jordan. And while I would have no issue in moving 2 million Muslims living in Judea and Samaria into Jordan, where I don't think they could be any more menacing than they are, the moving 1 million Gazans into Jordan is such a absurd concept that you could see the king, when he met with Trump a few days ago, he was just this stuttering wreck of a man. I mean, he just all crumbled up. He didn't even know what to say. I don't think I've ever seen a more pitiful individual. It was just stunned in that meeting. So the reality is that caught up into this mist, this whole mess is going to be the Fakistinians that are residing in the Arnon Valley and Ammon, Jordan. For there will be roaming animals fighting in militant militias along with their helpers, but they will cease and prostrate themselves because there will be no one left to terrorize. And that really is the idea here, is that in what we witnessed in Syria is that Islamic terrorist groups, and there were some 20 of them, fought each other for control and supremacy. And ultimately, it came down to now where there is one dominant Islamic terrorist group and some smaller ones. But Muslims are going to continue to be Muslims. They will continue to fight and kill each other. And that is what this stated, and it is what has happened, and it is what will continue to happen. The Islamic State that has now a new name, the Organization over Greater Syria is what they call themselves. They will splinter, and they will be fighting among themselves. And it says then, so the fortified city and defensive structures will cease to exist as a result of Ephraim, along with the government out of Damascus, including the residue of Iran, Syria, including some of the military influence of Iran, Iraq, and Jordan, for being similarly vehement and burdensome, fanatical, and dim-witted. We have seen what the IDF does when the IDF recognizes that it is a reckless maneuver to deploy troops. Now, in Gaza, we recognize that a lot of the work was done by the IDF on foot and in personnel carriers and in tanks, but the IDF quickly came to realize that they were just way too vulnerable, that a RPG and other kinds of armaments that were available to the Islamic terrorists there render a tank or armored personnel carrier just nothing but a death trap. And there's only so much you can do. So you can use the tank, but if you're going to use the tank in urban warfare, all you're going to do is topple the building. And if you're going to set explosives in the tunnels, all you're going to do is topple the buildings. And so, for the most part, they just bombed Gaza back into the Stone Age, which should be comforting for Muslims, because religious leaders,
they never got out.
They're still there. They're still there. So now, if we look at what Israel has done in Gaza, And then we look to what has already transpired in and around Damascus, and then all the way north through directly north of Gaza, Idlib, and all of the homes and all of those places. They are nothing but a tangled wreck of ruins. The construction there is just not able to stand up to bombs, and the people there are not industrious enough, like the Germans, to build back their cities. It really, and we're just now celebrating the 80th anniversary of the firebombing of Dresden. And if you look at what the U.S. did to Dresden in firebombing, I think we killed 25,000 German civilians in one night. But you look at the pictures, it's almost identical to what it looks like in Gaza. This will be the only way that Israel can deal with the weaponizing of Damascus by this terrorist organization. They're not going to be able to risk the lives of that many of their young men and women to send them in as troops to try to de-arm this part of the world, this particular group of Islamic militants. And so the only thing they're going to be able to do is to bomb it. It's just like what they do in Beirut. They make no attempt in Beirut to do anything else. The same thing is going to be true with Damascus. And so what this is saying is that ultimately the final ruin of Damascus is going to be conducted by Israel. And you understand why. They're fighting for their very existence. And they're being put in a position where if they don't do this, if they don't have some kind of preventative strike against those who would perpetrate the next 10/7 on them, then they're put in a position where they would just have to endure it. And the problem with that is the IDF is not able, as we have learned, to deflect masses of mujahideen. They're, if Jordan and Syria and Syria doesn't have a military anymore, but if Jordan and Egypt were to decide to go to war, and you throw in Iran, Iraq, since America gave Iraq to Iran, if you were to throw it all in, Israel would probably defeat them militarily in a matter of weeks, if it even takes that long. But Israel is not in a position to deflect millions of mujahideen, as we have seen. They couldn't even deflect thousands of them. So anyway, this is going to be the future. This is what's going to happen. Then it says that the children of Israel who engage and endure with God will actually continue to exist, prophetically declares Yahweh of the vast array of spiritual messengers and envoys. So, while it is true that Israel will survive these attacks and fighting for her life, the number of Jews that are going to die is probably 2/3 worldwide, which means the death toll will be nearly twice the Holocaust between now and the end of this war. But there will be a very substantial group of Jews, a remnant, left over in the end. And it will actually transpire in that day. Now, this is the key prophecy that pertains to what I'm certain is the Trump plan. And it will be brought into fruition by MBS, who is a genuine psychopath. And I actually think both of them now are psychopaths, Trump and MBS. This is what they're going to do. And it will actually transpire in that day that the size of Yaakov, of Israel, will be decreased to the point of no longer being sustainable or viable. The fattest and best protected, most important place at the midsection of his physical existence will be leaned and wastefully sacrificed as part of the sickening agenda of world leaders. Yeshaya, Isaiah 17.
Wow.
What he is speaking of is the imposition of a Islamic state carved out of the very heart of Israel. And when you look at the lines for it and the way that what is called the West Bank comes in, and then you have Gaza on the other side, you're going to have 5 miles maybe of width, and it's in this intersection between these things, just north of that, 70% of the Israeli population resides. So the most important place at the nation's midsection of its current physical existence is going to be wastefully sacrificed, according to Yashaya, which is the imposition of the two-state solution. I say two-state solution, it is actually the final solution of the Jewish problem from the point of view of the Muslims who are neo-Nazis. And you might say, well, wait a minute, Israel's not going to go for that, not after 10-7. Oh, yeah, you are. You're being put in a position, being played for fools right now, as a matter of fact. You're being put in a position where that is imposed on you, you'll have no other options. And you might even accept it voluntarily based upon what I'm witnessing in Israel currently, where Israel is so keen on capitulating to the very Muslims who raped and tortured men and women of in the southern part of Israel. So this is going to happen, and it's going to happen according to Gabriel, who is Dode. When he visited with Daniel in Babylon, he spoke specifically of this treaty being ratified with many and gave us the timing of it, that it occurs 7 years before he returns. And so we know the timing of this. It means that it's going to occur concurrent with Shabbat, which means 7, which is 7 years prior to year 6000 Yah, when Yahweh and Dode return. So that's the timing of this event. And if you subtract 7 years from 2033, you're in 2026. Shabbat in 2026 is on the 22nd of May. That's the timing. Then there will exist something which can be compared to the collecting and bringing together of an intensely dramatic ingathering, the removal and receiving of a harvest of a katsir, a reaping during a short but vexing time of standing grain, of deeply rooted, steadfast, upright, and established grain. Before we go on, the grain harvest that occurs at this time, the next Moed Mikre to be fulfilled, is the very one we're talking about in this program. It is Shabbat. And from all of the insights that Yahweh has provided to us, gentlemen, we know that Shabbat will be fulfilled 7 years before Yahweh's return. That's why it's called sevens. Dode told us so, as Gabriel and Daniel, and we can deduce it from all of the other clues we have been given. And therefore we know the timing, May 2026. Now, this also means that the thinning of Israel, the imposition of the two-state solution, is coterminous with this, which also means that the time of Israel's troubles, which is 7 years long prior to the Messiah's return, is coterminous with all of this. So we have 3 coterminous events: beginning to the time of Jacob's troubles, the Shabbat harvest, and the imposition of an Islamic state carved out of the nation of Israel. And the epicenter of those 3 events is May 22nd of 2026, just 15 months from now. So this harvest will be of standing grain, which is deeply rooted, steadfast, and upright. Kama, standing up and established. This is mature members of the covenant family who have partaken from and benefited from Pesach, Matzah, and Bakorim, which means they know when it was fulfilled, who fulfilled it, why, and how. And they understand that the very same Messiah that we were anticipating returning on Yom Kippurim in 2033 on October 2nd is the one who fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bakorim. Yeah. Now this says, and his Zeroah, the one who is cultivating the seeds sown for his harvest to be fruitful and productive, will reap the harvest with unfolding implications, cutting the valued crop away from a troubling time of first fruits, forming an overflowing torrent, moving swiftly from one place to another in linear fashion as a result of the stem off of the main branch. Yeah, making the sounds there. This is filled with symbolism that is highly depictive of precisely what we have been led to understand. Is before this harvest, we have gleaned insights from this particular statement. First of all, there are three Zeroah. Moshe was the first Zeroah, Dod is the second, I am the third. As the third Zeroah, the role is to cultivate the seeds that the other two have sown so that the upcoming harvest of Shabuah is fruitful and productive. This is tied directly to the Shabuah harvest. And it says we will reap the implications of that harvest at a troubling time. This is another affirmation that we have three concurrent events. The troubling time, this is, and it's Katsir, T-S-A-R, is the heart of that word. That is the same word that is used to describe the time of Jacob's or Israel's G-S-A-R, troubles, where the nation is confined, subjugated, and the like. So we have another affirmation. We have the harvest. We have the imposition of a large swath of Israel carved out of its midst, and the time of Shar, troubles, all at the same moment. And it says that this is going to occur with with first fruits overflowing as a torrent, as a stream of light, if you will, off of the stem, which is connected to the main branch. The stem off the main branch is the choder, which is one of the other titles that Yahweh has prescribed to the role I'm playing, particularly one that is announced by Yashayah. The entire 11th chapter of Yashayah is devoted to introducing Yisrael to their choder, who is the recipient of Yah's seven spirits, so that he can perform the job that I am doing for you now, and to explain this to you for the first time. Now, in addition, there will be a time certain that which is similar to a rapid gleaning of what is left, a final ingathering to be quickly prepared and removed of first fruits from one place to another in linear fashion, in the profound depths of Raphaim, where the sick have been healed and the defective have been restored, while the feeble falter and sores of the damned remained. If you're a Israelite and you are hard-headed enough and foolish enough to pass on the Shabuah harvest, and you are one of, say, 5 million amongst 15 million Jews alive today that survive past Shabuah to the end of the time of Jacob's troubles, which will be at Teruah in 2033, then you have a chance to avail yourself of the Teruah harvest. It's a gleaning of olives and therefore of Israelites at that particular time. That would be on a Shabbat, a Friday evening of September 23rd of 2033, years 6,000 Yah. And it makes it very clear that this will not be a large gleaning, and it's going to occur very rapidly, and that it is for a very brief period of time. All those things have been conveyed, but it is the last chance for Israelites to become immortal and perfected and empowered and enriched by God, and to escape the bounds of the liability and the decay of physical bodies. And that's the purpose of it. Then the following day is when those who have been in the profound depths of Raphaim the sick will be healed, the defective will be restored, because it is on the Saturday, still the Shabbat of Teruah, which is corrupted to Rosh Hashanah and Rabbinic Judaism, that what we're going to find is that the Adam Parah, who is the man of the earth who has been particularly productive and fruitful, will lay down his corporeal body to accomplish this very thing, to heal and restore this mortal remnant that remains of Yisrael. So this is Yashaya 17:5. So you're getting a more complete understanding of the timeline. And this says, and he will remain enduring, left behind as flesh and blood, for having caused people with physical bodies to be spared as a remnant. The one who is left behind is the Zeroah, performing now on this next day as the Adam Parah. And it is his role to spare this remnant of Yisrael so that they are prepared for Yahweh's return. It says, thrust aside and left on the stems and branches, as would be the case with when an olive tree is beaten from all around to shake off some of the fruit. 2 or 3 mature olives from the top, most crucial and foremost branches, and the vocal branch who speaks, promises, and relates, 4 or 5 in the clefts of his crag, from his branches which have been broken off. The first and foremost branches should resonate with Yehudim, that is the descendants of Yahud and Yahudah, the beloved of Yah, where the branches that have been cut off would be Yisraelites. And so we have 4 or 5, or 2 and 3 of the first, 4 or 5 of the second. They're going to be protected by the fact that the Zeroah, according to my buddy Yashaya, is quite vociferous. He has a word for everything, and yet he is also denoted by his given name, Crag, which means clefts. And it is among his crags and clefts that he will be protecting this mortal remnant of Yisrael, and doing so as one would cultivate a flourishing and abundant harvest on behalf of future generations, because these will be the individuals who will procreate and create future generations in Yisrael. This is prophetically declared by Yahweh, who just so happens to be God. And he is the God of Yisrael, individuals who engage and endure with God. So this is quite the presentation. I'm going to read one more statement from Yeshaya 17, and then we're going to talk about what all this means as it relates to Trump's plan. Then it says, in that specific day, this man, this Adam, and it's very close to Adamah, which would be bloody red man of the earth, will actually pay attention to, highly regard, and accept the Almighty, the one who engaged and acted to get this done, his maker. And true enough, I've been doing that for the last 23 years. Nothing's going to change. But on this particular day, because of the sacrifice of the Adam Parah, I will be standing right beside Yahweh as he oversees these events. It says, and his eyes will choose to continuously look toward the set apart one of Yisrael. The set apart one of Yisrael is Dod. So you're going to have, at this point, myself as the Adam Parah, and Dod, the set apart one of Yisrael, who is returning with Yahweh, and Yahweh, all together, overlooking this scene, which is the sacrifice of the Adam Parah to restore Yisrael at this time. So that is the prophetic declaration that I wanted to share with you. There's much more to it that we will consider in future programs in terms of the United States' complicity and of the swarm of Muslims that are going to invade Israel this time. So what does all this have to do with Donald Trump? What is it, about a week ago, 10 days ago, fellas, that Donald Trump came up with the hip shoot announcement that he was going to turn Gaza into a resort.
Right.
And then someone had to remind him there's 2.2 million Muslims there. How are you going to turn it into a resort? Well, he keep on wanting to say, well, it's a demolition site. So, being a real estate developer, he wants to turn it into something he just can't help himself. Mm-hmm. And he hadn't thought about, well, what's going to happen with the 2.2 million Muslims? And the day 2 or day 3, he said, oh, we're just going to move them. We'll move the Muslims into Egypt can take half, Jordan can take half.
Right.
But what he forgot to do was talk to Egypt and Jordan about it. Now, could you have worked out a deal with Egypt and Jordan where they agreed to take them? Perhaps, but that deal would be so costly to the United States that it's hard to imagine. And, if you didn't want a costly deal, then what you would do with Egypt, you would tell Sisi, here's your choice. If you don't do as we ask, as I'm telling you, Trump doesn't ask, as I'm telling you, then we're going to tear up the peace accord between you and Israel. We're going to tell Israel that they can recapture the Sinai that was part of that deal. We're going to stop sending you billions of dollars of aid regularly, and we're no longer going to send you military hardware. Now that would get their attention. I don't think Israel or Egypt could survive any of those things, and Israel could clear out the Sinai in less than a week's time. Yeah, with Jordan, it's a little more complicated. While Jordan is the doormat for Islam, they don't have enough money, so they're totally dependent on others. They've intermarried with the Saudis. They are officially a client state of Saudi Arabia, and you have less options there. But nonetheless, you could. He's a little wimpy guy with a wimpy military with nothing he can do independently. You could force pretty much whatever you wanted, except there's no way to get 1 million Gazans from Gaza.
Right.
Okay. That many buses, no.
So since that plan is impossible, and let me explain why it's impossible, but then we have to figure out why is Trump saying it, and why did he say it before he positioned any of these pieces in place. It's impossible because the Gazans are malcontent Muslims. They have been indoctrinated to believe that Israel is theirs. They call themselves Palestinians, even though Palestine was invented by Hadrian just to tweak the noses of Jews. And even when the Philistines, of which it was named after, existed, they didn't have a country. There has never been a state of Palestine and or Philistia. And Hadrian just made it up, but you know how the Brits and some other scholars just love anything that is written in Latin. And so they ate it up, and well, they don't like Jews anyway, so that was they were happy to play along. But in terms of being a Palestinian people and a country called Palestine in modern times, this myth grew out of a 1968 meeting between Nasser and the KGB and the Muslim Brotherhood. And if you notice that 1967 is when the Muslims lost their second of 3 major wars against Israel. In 1973, they lost their third. And so they were looking for anything that they could use internally to weaken Israel so that they could defeat Israel militarily. And it's pretty amazing. They outnumbered Israel 100-1, and yet Israel constantly kicked their behinds. So they were looking for a way to accomplish that. And you wonder why the KGB was involved. The KGB's primary client for military hardware, which is how countries like the United States, China, and Russia control people, is through military hardware. And Egypt was a client of Russia, and Israel was a client of the United States for military hardware. And so this was Russia's opportunity to expand its influence over the region. So KGB funded it. It got the blessing of Nasser, who tried to implement it, and it received, of course, the endorsement of the Muslim Brotherhood, who probably conceived the idea, and they took the Jordanian flag, removed the star from the Jordanian flag, and that became the flag of Fakistan. So if you want to know the history of Fakistan, it dates to 1968. And they allowed a fellow, Yasser Arafat, to be the head of this new organization, even though he probably had the IQ of the average Gazan, which is sub 70, probably in the mid 60s. But they could control him because, well, he was a homosexual, and fundamentalist Muslims don't treat homosexuals very well. So they had a secret on him. He was a made man. So the conditions at that moment were that the Muslims living in Israel were the most productive, wealthiest, best educated, healthiest, longest lived, and by far the freest Muslims of anywhere in the world. And that was very embarrassing for Islam. So Yasser Arafat and his PLO decided that the way to change that is to have those Muslims kill their employers, murder their families, and become terrorist menaces, which would pretty much preclude them being wealthy from working for them, and would set the conditions that we now witness among Fakistanians. And he led two of these with deadly consequences. Now, because Israel has failed to denounce this myth that there is a place called Palestine and people called Palestinians, and the leftist media has touted it, and progressives now march under this banner, and they have indoctrinated generation upon generations of malcontents Muslims to believe that they are Palestinians with a cause, and that Palestine is theirs and the Jews are occupying their land. We now have in Gaza 2.2 million malcontent Muslims that their entire life is devoted to a single thing: killing Jews and eradicating Israel. This notion that you're going to get them to move out of Gaza, no matter how hellish the conditions are, and move further away from killing Jews is nonsensical. There's no way to do that. And the tactic would have to be a line a mile long and 3 deep of bulldozers. But they're just going to stand there and hope that they can play Happy Shahada and die as martyrs. So you'd have to run over them, and no one's going to do that.
And this isn't new. I mean, this has been talked about before. Didn't they move a bunch of Gazans into Egypt, and then they tried to take over Egypt? And I mean, anywhere you put them, they start fighting everybody.
Well, they moved them into there's this myth that Israel evicted them from their land. It's not true. It's during the 1948 War of Independence when the Muslims reneged on UN 242 and said, no, we will not accept any state of Israel. They told the Muslims living in Israel that they needed to move out so that their Islamic armies would have no one in the way when wiping out Jews. So it was the Islamic nations that got them to move. This time, the Islamic nations are saying, no, this is their eternal homeland. You're never going to move them. And you have Hamas, who is stronger now than they were at the beginning of the war, with armed to the teeth, and they torture Gazans who just accept food from the United Nations caravans and other caravans of food that come into the place, if they start voluntarily walking across a border into another country, they're as good as dead. Any Gazan that does that is not only going to be killed by the most fundamentalist jihadists, but they'll be tortured to death. They're just not going to do it. And the only way to try to make them do it is to run over them with bulldozers. And, the Trump says, oh, no, it'll be fine because we're going to build this marvelous new cities for them. There'll be the, streets lined with gold. It'll just be the Wizard of Oz is going to create the Emerald City, and it's going to be, and they'll be free, he says. Now, there is no country that has ever allowed Fakistinians to be free, ever. Because anytime they can maneuver and roam, they arm themselves again to the teeth, and they undermine the government. Look what happened in Lebanon. Look what happened in Jordan. Look what happened in Kuwait. Every place they go is same thing happened in Egypt and the Sinai. Every place they go, they're malcontent Muslims. They kill other Muslims. Mm-hmm. And so they would have to be this giant penitentiary for the 2.2 million Muslims in Gaza. But he wants them to be free. I mean, what chance do you think you have them to move them out of one area in Gaza into another area, even if you were to spend the, I don't know how many billion it costs to build a city for 2.2 billion people that do nothing to contribute to their own digs, but it's a hell of a lot of money. And if you circle it with wall after wall after wall, it is indeed now a prison in the Sinai. And if you don't, then they will metastasize with other jihadi young Muslims. They'll have no limits on the number of weapons they can acquire, and they will soon reconstitute themselves, and they'll come into Israel with millions of jihadists. And the same thing is true, and maybe even worse, in Jordan, where there already are 2.1 million malcontent Muslims who view themselves as Fakistinians and who are disgruntled and who think that they have this right to return to a country that was never theirs. And they are largely unarmed now because the monarchy spends enormous amounts of its time and energy keeping them unarmed. But you put another million highly armed, ruthless savages among them, they are not going to stay unarmed. Yeah. And the difference is that in Egypt and in Jordan, the IDF cannot do what it can do in Judea and Samaria and in Gaza, which is to constrain the flow of arms and to do surgical strikes to destroy caches of arms. They can't do it in these other two places. Mm-hmm. And they can't contain the number of jihadists from around the world who join them. And so if Trump could achieve his plan, which I think he knows is impossible to achieve, and it indeed is impossible to achieve. Egypt's not going to accept this deal, and Jordan is made to sound like they accepted it. They accepted 2,000 children. That's a far cry from a million armed jihadists, and so no. Neither one are going to accept the plan. It would have to be forced on them. The cost of forcing it on them would be egregious. And if it were possible, Israel would be suicidal because it would create these two much larger enclaves where you would end up with at least 4 million Muslims, exceedingly well armed, all poised and committed to invading Israel within the next 2 or 3 years, with a 1,000-fold what happened on 10/7. And no one is thinking that through. So why would Trump, who can't be this stupid, say such a thing, since he knows it's impossible? He knows it's impossible. He has to know it's impossible.
Part of the deal. Ask for something crazy. Let's just start talking about it, Well,
no, it's not just start talking about it. If you propose something that now gets Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Jordan so off kilter that they're saying, holy crap, no. I mean, this ruins everything we have worked so hard to achieve with this dagger positioned right in the heart of Israel. And now this man wants to take half of the Muslims and move them into our country where they'll be attacking us versus keeping them there where they can attack Israel. Oh, they're having a conniption fit. I mean, you can see them just melting down with one exception. MBS. Saudi Arabia. He is Trump's bud. He is also the man that keeps Trump afloat in his financial empire. He's the one that bribed Trump's son-in-law, Kirshner, $2 billion after the Qataris bribed his Middle East facilitator, czar, with $623 million Wycliffe. And Saudi Arabia has the ultimate Trump card, to use the metaphor, which is petrodollars. The moment that Saudi Arabia says we'll take any currency from anybody to sell oil, and they are formally a member of BRICS, and they convince all of their little buddies to do the same thing, the U.S. economy, total collapse. There'll be nothing left of the U.S. economy. And so they own the Trump card. MBS is a more savage psychopath than is Donald Trump. And the two of them most assuredly have discussed this. And they know that if you put everybody back on their heels, then you're playing into the hands of the crazy men that put them there. And therefore, the Saudis are holding this conference to come up with a retort. And the retort, of course, is going to be a Pakistani Islamic State carved out of the heart of Israel as the solution. And Trump's then going to promise the Israelis who actually believe him, I'll promise to protect you. You don't have to worry. You've got the backing of the United States. I've always had your back. I mean, I moved the embassy to Jerusalem. I gave you the high ground of up there and the Golan. Okay, you're going to have to give that back. But, no big deal. Let's not mince issues here. You're going to have this lovely resort over there in Gaza.
It'll be nice. Great.
And I had your back. I said all the things you wanted me to say. I got you a few hostages back. Nah, this is the only way, boys. And if you don't agree, then I will pull the United States support from you. No more weapons. No more subsidies. No more protection in the United Nations. You're totally and completely isolated in the world. You're going to go along with this deal. And the deal that the Islamic fiefdoms that are meeting next week in Saudi Arabia are all going to propose is the only solution is the two-state solution. And the shock value of this means that they will accept terms on this two-state solution that aren't quite as draconian on their initial appearance as previously, and they're going to promise peace to Israel and normalization as a result. And Israelis do not understand, nor does Donald Trump, the consequence of the Treaty of Hudaybiyah and what that means to them. And all of that is going to do is position the ultimate dagger now is not on the periphery of Israel, but also in the heart of Israel. So Israel now has millions of Muslims that want to destroy them on the periphery and millions of Muslims that want to destroy them in their heart. And because it's a separate state, they can't invade to eliminate the weapons. Israel's indefensible. That's the plan. And it's going to happen in and around May the 22nd of 2026. And if it were not for this craziness, this put people back on their heels and having the Israelis think, wow, this is our guy, man. He has got our back. He is doing everything that we want, fooling them like this. Well, pushing the Arabs to accept a plan that they normally wouldn't have taken, because there's no Muslim in the world that wants a two-state solution. They want Israel destroyed. They want one Islamic state of the world. So this is what he achieves by such insanity. And I want Israel to know that's what's coming. And that's how this plan is being played out. Well, fellas, do you think I missed anything here, or do you want to play devil's advocate?
No, that's the most likely outcome. The way you were stating it, I was trying to figure out how he was going to get around the Gaza thing after he had already committed, after he floated it. But I forgot about the MBS card. Yeah, they're totally in his pocket. So Trump is. So
Yes.
Yeah, he can pull the strings any way he wants.
Yeah, actually, I think MBS and Donald Trump think that rather than one being in the other's pocket, I think they think they're the two smartest people in the room, and they think that they're richer, smarter, better than everybody else. And they've already played this out so that they both receive the Nobel Peace Prize, and that Trump receives another prize, which is billions of dollars from Saudi Arabia, so that he and his family live wealthy ever after, or so they think.
So they, wait till Yao has something to say.
Well, of course, but that's 7 years away.
I know.
From the deployment of this plan. Now, again, I'm not saying this because I am a libertard. I am outspoken against progressives. I'm not saying this because I'm a Democrat, because I would find almost nothing to agree with in the Democratic Party. And I'm certainly not a MAGite. I'm not a Republican. I'm not anyone who is in favor of U.S. politics. I am apolitical. I am just an observer of the scene, and my interest is Yahweh's interest, which is Israel. And I recognize this is exactly what's going to happen to Israel, and that they will have no friend, because the United States, prior invasion of both Libya and the overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi, of Iraq, the overthrow of Saddam Hussein, and then the invasion of Afghanistan, has, in those three situations, created a much worse situation. And then our meddling in Syria, combined with all of that, has caused this migration of millions of Muslims into Europe, where they have completely undermined any support for Israel or Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow progressives bought into all of this. It's been something that has been coming now for a decade or so. And now they're fully in the most ignorant, hypocritical, and immoral partnership in the history of the world, and the most deadly in the history of the world. And so Israel have no support anywhere. If you're a Jew, you will have no place to hide.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
When does America go to war? When do they get theirs?
Oh, in terms of in this whole process?
Yeah.
We're really not told how America, Russia, China, Europe, for example, start their world war. We just know from the prophets, particularly the prophet Yoel, that this will be the worst time in world history as it relates to war, hugely worse than World War II and the Holocaust. And so the things that Kirk, you and I have been talking about for a long time, is how, particularly in the U.S. meddling in Syria, where long before all of this was placed, the CIA began working to create,
knocking off all the dictators.
To see if we could eliminate the dictators and turn the result into countries that bought American weapons as opposed to Russian weapons was part of the strategy. And don't think for a moment the U.S. government doesn't do this sort of thing. I mean, look at Afghanistan. It's well known and published that the CIA under Zbigniew Brzezinski thought that it would be a swell idea for the U.S. to rent the Taliban from Pakistan, paying the Pakistani government for the use of their Taliban through large contributions of U.S. weapons, plus no interference in their nuclear program, and that in return for that, we would use the Taliban, and then we actually helped create Al Qaeda as a way of recruiting jihadists. It was called the database of jihadists, so that the United States could wage war against the Soviet presence in Afghanistan to give the Russians a taste of what the Russians gave the U.S. in Vietnam. And this is the brainchild that led directly to 9/11, with Al Qaeda having grown very powerful and wanting to be the Islamic force that tossed Saddam Hussein, who they hated, out of power and out of Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. And the Sauds chose to bribe George Bush and let Americans die and let Americans pay for the defense of Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, which is one of the great travesties of all time, something that damns George Bush's soul. And because Al Qaeda, the base that the American CIA had armed and built, was miffed that they were not given that opportunity, particularly considering the fact that having defeated the Russians with American weapons, they knew they could certainly beat Saddam Hussein. But they were not given that opportunity, and America sacrificed its own blood and coin doing that, pissed Al Qaeda off, and the result was 9/11. So our CIA does this kind of stuff all the time. It's not an organization that is protecting America's interests, but instead making Americans more vulnerable. Even in Afghanistan, the poppy production for heroin was non-existent prior to our military and CIA involvement. We went in, and it became, once again, 90% of the world's production. And it's now only after we're forced out and the Taliban has returned that it is diminished again. But, of course, replaced with fentanyl. So we are not, as a nation,
we're disgusting.
Moral. Yeah, we are. And I use we because my passport still says the United States of America. And, there are things that America does reasonably well and better than other nations. But being better than other nations today ain't saying much.
It's not a prize, right?
It's a pretty low card. Anyway, that's what the prophets have foretold. It is going to happen this way. I want Israel prepared, and I don't want anybody surprised when it turns out the way that the prophets have depicted. All right, gentlemen, we are 1 hour into Family Hour. And if we were true to Family Hour, it would be the end of our program. But as Yashaya says, you have a talkative host. So I think
he does.
Yeah, he does. He said that in that prophecy. I'm going to get him for that. I represent that statement.
Don't slap him too hard. Yeah.
Yeah, I represent that statement. Yes. Listen, I love Yashia.
Of course.
And Yashia wrote the book on identifying the choder, how to be a choder, how to respond to the choder. And he is the guy, and also the guy for end times prophecy. If you want to know what's going to happen, you turn to Yashia. Mm-hmm. So, if we return just to the Yahweh's Torah presentation now of Shabbat, because now Yashia has given us the exact timing of it, is when all this will transpire. Well, Yahweh also had a lot to say about it, and it is the time that we receive a doubling of the tenfold enrichment and empowerment that begins with the Bikurim harvest, and then is repeated again as we go from adopted into the covenant as mortals on Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim to becoming immortal and energy-based beings on Shabuah. So one of the things that I'm surprised that more people don't appreciate, fellas, is that while it's obvious that Yahweh intends to enrich us, we can enrich him.
Well, yes, relationships do that.
Yeah, relationships do that. Exactly. And while you, as a parent, pour your life into your children and you do everything you can to lift them up and raise them, it is often the most rewarding thing that you can do. And this is the same for Yahweh. The one thing that Yahweh needs to be infinite is to grow. That's another thing that people don't understand. But you can't be infinite unless you're constantly growing. And the only reasonable way for Yahweh to be more than he is at this moment is for him to have more enriching experiences with the likes of his creation. And there's no more endearing way to accomplish that than with sons and daughters, and with us growing in our admiration, respect, and understanding of God. So this very concept of mutual enrichment works on both sides of the family equation. Just as a father raises his children with his love, guidance, food, shelter, influence, and support, thereby helping his children grow, children can enrich their parents through the experiences they share. By observing our Heavenly Father's Torah guidance, we bring great joy to God. I'm certain that when we figured out that his son volunteered, Dode volunteered to serve as the Pesach El, the Passover lamb, and to open the door to heaven and then take our guilt and deposit it in Sheol on matzah to perfect us, and then became the firstborn of firstborn children, to allow us to be part of God's family and inherit all that is his to give. And we recognize that he is also our Messiah and King, our shepherd, a great prophet, and the Zeroah, the Passover lamb. The combination of those things had to bring great joy to Yahweh.
Mm-hmm.
They had said as much, but no one had thought as much for 3,000 years. His own people, with all of the prophecies explaining exactly these things, paid no attention to them. In fact, not only denied that Dode had accomplished any things, even denied that God could have a son.
Yeah.
Said that the Messiah was unknown, and then came up with a false Messiah. Denied that Dode did any of these fulfillments. And so to reverse that has got to be at long last great satisfaction for a loving father and his beloved son. So Yahweh's affinity for the Torah, his devotion to learning what it teaches, and his enthusiastic response to those like Dode who learn and then share what God is offering, win Yahweh's heart, making Dode, first of all, the most loved of men, and those of us who identify with him and identify him in these important roles, extremely pleasing, enriching to Yahweh. Because if we enlarge Yahweh's family, even if we don't enlarge the family, just say that the number of people that are harvested on Shabuah is those who are currently active working on behalf of Yahweh right now. And let's say that it's less than 1,000 people. We can still, over the next 15 months, enrich Yahweh's family experience if not a single additional person is added to his family.
Great. Yes, that will work.
You know how?
Well, we grow.
Yes.
One thing.
Yes. We're more interesting to Yahweh. The more we learn, the more we grow.
Yeah.
I remember with my my granddaughter when she was a baby up through about 2 years old, before she could talk, before she could get up and choose where she wanted to be, before she could really interact in a meaningful way. You're saying, I love this little rascal, just as cute as she can be. I love spending time around her, and that's wonderful. But when she had the skill to communicate and interact, when she had the skill to come to you and say, let's play this game, Grandpa. Let's, let's have a tea party. Let's play house. I mean,
I remember you telling me about the tea party.
Wanted to do, and now you could do these things with her and communicate with her, and you could go out for an afternoon and chase leaves blowing in the wind, and just whatever it was, she was so much more fun. Now, don't you think the same is true with God?
Absolutely.
And so if we enrich his covenant family and help everyone grow and learn, and they all gain by having shared with one another what we learn, and we create these wonderful songs that we're creating together, and these live stream podcasts that we are sharing together, and enriching and upholding one another, this creates a richer family experience for our God. And if we operate effectively on both opportunities, sharing this message so that more of God's people, Yisrael and Yehudim, listen and respond and join the covenant family, and that those who are in it grow, then we're doing a lot to make God happy. And, once you come to know that Yahweh proved that he exists and that he inspired these words and who he is and what he's looking for, at that point, what could be a better use of your time than doing something that makes God happy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't think of anything, especially for the return on investment. A little bit of time here, and sorry,
a whole lot of time out there. Yeah,
right.
Yeah. I don't think I have. Well, I've talked about it. Return on investment. How we invest hours, and he returns it with millennia.
Mm-hmm.
We invest some chump change here and there, and he returns it with inheriting the universe. Okay, so
big land grab.
So, I understand that this isn't the give and take here is not on the same level. It probably is on the same level in terms of what our capacity is.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, I own this little plot of land that we have our wonderful nest on here, and Yahweh has the entire universe of a couple of trillion galaxies with 100 billion or so stars per galaxy. Okay,
one dimension too, just in one dimension.
Yeah. And we're working in 3 dimensions, and not even fully in all of those, and he's working in 7 dimensions. So okay, and even though I want to encourage people to participate in the covenant, we do, based upon this exchange, knowing that yes, it's going to take your time, but you're going to have that time paid back in dividends, and we will present it that way. I've never thought of it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I am just the ultimate simpleton. My wife is laughing over here in the peanut gallery. No, I mean it. I'm the ultimate simpleton. And I say that because right from our first meeting, when Yahweh managed to convince me that he was God, it just seemed like a really simple option. Since he's God, how can you be wrong to do what he wants?
Right.
Impossible.
And so the next 23 years, my entire life is pay attention to what God wants. You can learn that from his testimony or observing the people that he has chosen to work through and how he worked through them. And he tells you things he doesn't want and the things that he does want. You're really clear about this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I just figured if I commit myself to doing what he wants, then I'm going to have a fulfilling and enriching life. I've never actually gone beyond that. I thought that simple equation was good enough.
Right.
He's God, and he's told me what he wants. I'm just going to do it because I can't imagine that not working out well.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Well, and it's not like it was work. I can only speak to my, what I've done, and I enjoy every minute of it. It doesn't feel like work, and so I'm presuming that you translating, I mean, your happy place, you
Yeah.
enjoy doing
Oh,
so.
sure.
Yeah, you enjoyed it, so it doesn't feel like work.
I didn't. I wasn't suggesting that the trade here was for doing something Yahweh wanted versus, say, something that I might have wanted or somebody else wanted was going to be a trade from leisure to work. It isn't. Either, no matter what we do, we're going to work at what we do, or we're not going to live. We don't survive apathy well. And the choice to work with Yahweh just happens to be exceedingly pleasurable and rewarding. And yes, once you get involved in it, you would do it just because it is pleasurable and rewarding. But that really isn't the motivation. The motivation just is really simple. This is what God wants.
Yeah.
If you do what he wants, you ought to expect it to be pleasurable and rewarding.
Yeah.
Why would it not? Why would it not be? And it is. The other thing that's really simple for me is on this relationship with Yahweh. Yahweh was very clear. He says, "I am your father, and you are my son." When he was speaking to David, he's very clear in saying that David is the exemplar of the covenant. He's very clear in saying that the covenant is the means that he wishes to interact with humankind, and he calls it firstborn children after all, and it is a first fruits harvest that is Shabuah. So there are many children. Many children. Dod is the example. Yahweh presented his relationship with Dod as father and son. Now, you don't have to be a Mensa student to put that together and to say, since Dod was Yahweh's first pick and he loved him and he said, "You are my son, I am your father," that if I approach Yahweh the same way and really stop thinking of Yahweh as Almighty God, as infinitely more powerful and more brilliant and everything that I am, which is, I don't care who you are, it's intimidating. And it's not comforting to have a flawed person that close to someone who is that perfect. I've figured the simplest approach, again, a simpleton. I'm just going to refer to Yahweh as my father. And I'm going to approach him as I would approach a loving father. I'm not going to have any fear. I'm not going to have any concern. I've got nothing to hide. I'm not trying to impress him. It's just, I don't even have to ask for what is his will because he's very clear in telling it. But I think if you, and I can't say that I can speak for everybody. This was my thought process. And my thought process was view God the same way that he presented his relationship with David. So God's my father. And recognize that since he proves that he is God, and he is very clear as to what he would like us to do, if we do those things, then our life is going to have the greatest possible
meaning,
result and meaning. That's why I think it's so important for us to make Dod's life known. He's the perfect example. Now Dod is different than us, though, in a way. Is different than us in a lot of ways, but one of the ways is that Dod was given a responsibility that is beyond the rest of us. I feel like I have a responsibility to defend Israel. That's why I wrote Goddamn Religion and Twistianity and also Babel, defending Israel against the threat of Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. And I take on progressives now because they are particularly lethal to Israel. So I I'm right there with Dode. I'm going to stand up for Israel. And I'm going to tell you, standing up for Israel in social media and in life with words is no less harrowing and takes no less courage than battling a foe with the sword. So I think we're right there in terms of protecting his people. But there's a real difference in terms of Dode being king of Israel, the sovereign of Israel, the one who is the leader of Israel. And the rest of us. I can guide Israel, I can talk to Israel, I can encourage Israel, but I'm not a sovereign. Being a sovereign is a tremendous burden when the standard is set by God.
Mm-hmm.
And when the people are as irascible and difficult as Israel has been the last 3,400 years, it's even a bigger challenge. This idea of leading Israel, which Dode had to do, is just way beyond my comprehension as to how he even endured it. I mean, I can understand why Dode later in life it just was overwhelmed by it. So we don't do that. But we can certainly support him and recognize him and honor him and respect him for doing so and encourage his people to do so. But the other thing that Dode did that none of us will do is that he volunteered to fulfill Passover as the lamb and be tortured by the Romans, and then to fulfill matzah and actually take our guilt with him into Sheol to deposit it there. That's a level of commitment, of courage, and compassion that you could take every other human that has ever lived and you could put all of our courage and compassion and character together. It's not going to equal that.
It's unimaginable.
Yeah, it's unfathomable. But he explains the reasons for it. I agree with his decisions. I understand how he figured out that it was the right thing for him to do, even though he only had the Torah plus his discussions with Yahweh through Nathan. That's all he had to work with. But I was able to make the same connections that he did. So I understand how he figured it out, that this was the right move for him, particularly as he considered what happened on Mount Moriah with Abraham and Ishak, and Yahweh providing the lamb, and that whole discussion of father and son. It was obvious that he would figure out the timing of 40 Yobel between these events and exactly when he would arrive in Israel. And one of the things that I've said a lot of times that in Daniel 9, when Dode as the Messiah, with the title Gabriel, God's most courageous and compassionate man, was speaking to us of his arrival. At one point, I thought that the time that he gave, and I made a mathematical error, was the 4 days before Passover in year 4000 Yah, which was 33 CE. And that's not the date. And the reason it's not the date is that I was trying to create a prophecy that we could rename Jesus Yosha and have Yosha fulfill. But the moment you realize that Dode is talking about himself and that he is the Passover lamb, you come immediately to recognize that that there can be no Jesus. In the moment you recognize that Dode fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bakodim, then this whole myth of Jesus by any name is nothing but a crude counterfeit, and he's a mythological figure who never existed. And so this idea of arriving 4 days before Passover in 33 CE became meaningless because what we're trying to do is fit the Christian New Testament narrative where, he came into Jerusalem and the shouts of Hosanna and all that sort of thing. But no, the Christian New Testament is rubbish from beginning to end. The date that Dode actually gave, right in the middle of Chag Matzah. What he wanted us to recognize is he was coming to fulfill Matzah. And the Chag Matzah includes Pesach and Bakodim. The date he chose, when you work out the math, is right in the heart of Chag Matzah. And that's really profound. and insightful and important in this regard. So Dode is the one who did all of this, and if we want to capitalize on Shabbat, the place we begin is with that recognition. When we are wondering what small thing, by the way, we can offer, and I think that was one of the more interesting epiphanies earlier today when we were talking about what was soluble and clear and something we could contribute to the relationship, but yet had really no great value, and to realize the answer is water. And on this particular thing, you guys, I think, listened to that program earlier today on Shabbat. In addition to those 2 loaves of bread to come out of the house, Yahweh was saying, you as a free will offering, bring out the thing that is the ultimate solvent, that is clear and incredibly inexpensive for you, transparent even. And you realize he's asking us to bring water. And he's telling us water's nature. Yes, it is transparent. Water is the ultimate solvent. That's why we use it to clean our skins. And that's why when we drink water, it purifies our system. It takes the everything out with it. And then you realize that our bodies are composed mostly of water and in a physical realm. And what we're trying to do is to shed our physical nature to become a energy-based light being. And therefore, why don't we bring the very thing that Yahweh is going to eliminate in this transformation? It's like, me being the Adam of Parah and offering my corporeal body on Teruah, big whoop. By the end of Teruah, it's not going to have any value anyway. That's, so you have a painful day, a bad ouchie, but okay, the rest of it's, you're really not giving up much. And bless his heart, it's going to make a big deal out of it. And I appreciate all of that and the like. But the other aspect is, of course, with water, we're born of water. That is, the breaking of the water is when a child is born in the physical world. And so water being the source of life, Yahweh is saying, okay, understand that you're going to be reborn now of spirit. And there's so many aspects of this, and the cleansing and solvent nature of it represents the bulk of what we are, and then that final bit of it where seeds don't grow without water.
No.
And Yahweh was trying on this day to cultivate a productive harvest. We need to water those seeds, and so he's asking us to tote some water. And then you even think about water beyond all of that. What happened when you had Elia orchestrating the sacrifice of the bull to repudiate the religious and political culture of Israel in his day? What was the element? Water,
indeed.
Yeah, water. And then when Yahweh conducts this great spectacle over the sacrifice of the Adam of Parah, he is releasing torrents of water from the Temple Mount that is going to wash his people clean. Water everywhere.
Yeah.
Washing away all of the garbage, the religious, political, and militant garbage and conspiratorial garbage that has come to destroy Israel, while cleansing the children of Israel. Water, everywhere water. And so I think that's what he's talking about. And that's the fun of doing a live show like this is, I'm looking at this and saying, all right, the camera's on, the lights are on. Now it's your time there, pal, to explain why he's talking about a transparent solvent and what it is that he's asking you to bring that has so little cost but so much meaning.
I have one quick question.
Sure.
Last week when we were studying Korah, 2023, and then I went down, I think yesterday or the day before, and I looked at all the letters, and obviously you're the Kohen in this thing, because if you look at all the reasons, all the meanings of Kohen, you are all of those, and it's not always applicable to all other times you might use Kohen. And the one thing I couldn't figure out when I did the letters, I said, now, why does it have a seed at the end? A nun is the last letter.
Yes.
And I thought to myself, well, that is the most appropriate thing for this Kohen at this time, because we refer to you constantly as planting the seeds and taking care of the seeds. If you put the nun before the hay, I can understand that. I would always go back and say, okay, well, this is potential turning into someone who's arrived by walking the walk and in awe of Yahweh. But when you reverse them, which it is in Kohen, it has to be the person who's lifting up, or the person who's doing something with engaging with the nun. And I could be wrong, and y'all can say, "Oh, you're an idiot," and that's fine.
No,
I can take it, but I just thought, why do they have?
I happen to agree with you, and I was of the contention early that when I was suggesting that after translating Zechariah, that Dode was going to perform the role of the priest during Kippurim, and it was so obvious because Yosha, the high priest, was filthy, and there was nothing he could be done with him. He was so repulsive in his religiosity. And so the only solution was Dode serving as the priest on Yom Kippurim to anoint the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant. And when you first do that, you say, boy, man, am I way out on a limb now, because he's not a Loey, he's a Yehud. And then you realize that when Dode dressed up as the high priest to bring the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem, the people that he chose to act as, first he's dressed as the high priest, and the people he chose to act as the role of the priest were from Edom. And when Yeshaya explains the blessing that is being brought by the role that I'm playing to Israel, he says, pay attention. He's the man from Edom.
Yeah.
And so just as Dode, who is our king, assigned the role of priest to these individuals, Obed-Edom, one working on behalf of from Edom, one who works and is from Edom, and now we've got the man from Edom. I think that serving in the role of a priest over Shabua to orchestrate this harvest.
Yeah, it has to be you.
It does make a lot of sense. And you're right that none at the end, we are planting and cultivating these seeds which take root and grow into God's children.
Yeah.
And the hay that precedes it is the person looking up and reaching up to God, pointing up to God and saying, he's the one who's responsible for all of this. And we're going to stand right with him and be right with him.
Cool.
So, I happen to agree with you. And then when Leah found the R1A, which is
I'll put that in the notes too, because I said, in fact, I told Sylvia the same thing last night. I said, they've come up with this
R1A
marker.
Yeah, and it's the marker of the priest. So Yahweh doesn't miss a trick. He's
no, I don't think you do either.
No, and that's why you feel like you're on the spot when you do a live stream like this. And I will not on these live streams. I have never once gone to the end of the text. You saw me, gentlemen, in the 15 minutes before the show here. I did sit down, and I was focused because something in me said, I don't think we should start back with the Shavua harvest. I think we need to go to Yashaya 17. I wanted to clip my translation of it and then think about how I was going to, once we finished it, get back to the text we wanted to talk about and have layered Word documents here. And so I was focused on that. But I never go forward in the text to read where we're going to go.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I don't do that, well, first of all, I wrote these books. And I wrote
You have a familiarity with them.
but if you've written whatever it is, 36 books so far, they average 650 pages, and you've done so over 23 years, I can tell you, no matter how good your memory is, you're not remembering every word of them.
No.
Okay, you just can't do that. But you come to understand the message of all of them by having done this. So my thought process has always been that, particularly now that we're doing these live streams, if I can come here and look into this camera and turn on these lights and begin, and I can talk to you from the heart, and I can talk to you based upon the 23 years of translating and contemplating the word of Yahweh, and that as we share it together, I'm able to provide insights to help you understand it and grow, then that is so much more enriching, even entertaining, credible, inspiring than if it's all pre-planned and edited and that sort of thing. I think there is an enormous amount of credibility that just goes along with, we're going to talk. I'm going to share with you what I learn, and I want to share with you the whole process that comes from examining the words that Yahweh shared and trying to glean as many insights as possible from them. We're talking about harvest. We can harvest conclusions and glean insights. And this is how you do it. And you ought not be afraid to say, I think I understand this Solomon thing. And you ought to be trusting enough in the spiritual inspiration from having Yah's 7 spirits to say, I'm going to do this. I'm going to tell you the inspiration that just came into my mind based upon reading these words, and I'm going to explain the reasons for them. And you don't have to agree, but if you understand this can be deduced from them, and you're thinking about it, just like you were saying with your analysis of Cohen.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you, and I happen to agree with you, but even if we didn't agree,
yeah,
I'm enriched by the thought process that you used.
But you know what to eliminate.
Yes, to examine those words. So this is instrumental to what God wants us to do. He wants us to be thoughtful, to learn, to grow, and while we're doing it, to share and to be real.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can assure you that when Moshe stepped in front of the children of Israel and to deliver Devarim, he didn't do it with notes that he had written on the palm of his hand. He didn't have a tablet that had been chiseled, and he said, "That's my teleprompter. Let's go." No, you got to be real. You got to be genuine. It's some things.
There's been a lot of those moments. I mean, when you came out with, I just thought of something, a Malacca, and you go into this explaining Malacca just not being work, but Malak in the feminine, and it was like 15 minutes. Like, wow, this is not anywhere else. This is brand new,
And it's enriching to do that. And say, I'm going to tell you my thought process here.
Okay.
As I said, the thought process, I've done the previous shows, but the thought process on Malacca is that Yahweh had just said that Shabuah is an essential day. What makes it essential? And so now the first thing is you've changed your perspective to saying, I need to be clued in as to what makes this harvest essential. Because being essential means it has to play a major role in the reconciliation of Yisrael in preparation for Yahweh's return. That's the only way it becomes essential. And when in the next statement, you're reminded that the thing that makes it essential and enables it to happen is to preclude people from getting in the way of the Malaka. So at that point, this Malaka can't be the Yahweh. It can't be an aspect of Yahweh because nobody's going to get in the way of Yahweh.
Mm-hmm.
No.
Okay, so now you know that Yahweh is aware that there will be those who try to interrupt, who try to demean, who try to usurp the role of the one he has chosen to cultivate this Shavua harvest, and knows that the consequences are significant enough that he needs to warn them against doing so.
Yeah.
And so
He
he
warned.
used the term Malaka, which speaks of a heavenly representative, somebody who is speaking on behalf of heaven. And then he puts it in the feminine so that we would look at what are the feminine aspects of the role of the person who is cultivating Shavua. Well, you begin with that unique individual has 7 ruach. Ruach is feminine.
Mm-hmm.
That individual is called the third of the 3 Zeroah, cultivating the harvest from those seeds. That is feminine. This person is specifically described as the Adamah Parah, where Adamah and Parah are both feminine. And it's the productive man of the earth who is productive. And so now you put all of those things together and you say, well, if there's another explanation beyond this, I really want to hear it, because this one now, all the pieces fit together.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean that Yahweh can't use Malaka to speak of something else in a different context, but this context was the Shavua harvest.
Mm-hmm.
And Yahweh says it's essential, which means that anything that precludes its intended result is really serious, and so serious he would issue an admonition: don't get in the way of this.
Mm-hmm.
So all of these insights is what makes it fun. And you know, it's like so many things that are part of this whole discovery we're on, that you really have to build your base of knowledge and understanding, fellas, before you can begin to understand this level of insight. Kirk, you didn't begin with the first word that you analyzed based upon the Hebrew letter shapes with Cohen.
No.
So you've been doing this for 15 or more years.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, from an artist's perspective, understanding the letters and what they convey. Similarly, for example, one of the things that I have realized that I was looking for a way that Yahweh could perfect us on Matzah, because Matzah is clearly the day where he perfects his children. My credit, I figured that out early, that was the purpose of Matzah, is to remove the fungus of religion and politics. So I always assume, because Yahweh is light, that if the set apart spirit has a garment of light, which Isaiah mentions in one place, and she covers us with this garment of light, the darkness in our light disappears, because where there is light, there is no darkness. And that seemed like a pretty good explanation of how this might happen. But then we learned, and that was also, I'll just say another one that would be related to this. I knew there was no Jesus Christ. Jesus wasn't even invented till the 17th century. And so I came up with the idea that, maybe his name was Yosha, and that Yahweh's soul embodied him as an avatar, and that Yahweh did these things, until I realized that explanation was so tortured that it was impossible. Yahweh cannot go to the place of separation from Yahweh, and so he can't fulfill matzah, and Yahweh can't be his own son. the Father cannot be his own Son. And so the whole idea of Bakurim doesn't work under those circumstances. And I'm here to tell you the creator of the universe isn't going to take on a physical body so that the likes of Roman morons can torture him. None of that. It just didn't work. But you got to come up with something, right? And unless you obliterate the entire Christian New Testament, unless you recognize there could not have been a Yosha because Dode fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim. So Jesus is nothing but a crude counterfeit and a myth who never existed. Because the moment you realize that Dode did these things, there can be no Jesus. He's just gone. He is a non-personage. He's nothing but a crude counterfeit of Dode. Well, likewise, the moment you realize that the way Dode fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim, particularly Matzah, is and you have to read this into his narrative in the 22nd and 88th Mizmor, where he went to the place of separation, and then Yeshaya tells us that he was covered and laden with our guilt, and so you put those things together. He carried on his nefesh soul our guilt into Sheol. Now, under that basis, our guilt is all gone. It's invisible, never to be seen again. We are perfect. We don't need to be perfected. We are perfect now. We don't need a garment of light. We are perfect in God's eyes. All of our guilt was carried away at that point. Now you don't need the Ruach to provide this garment of light.
Yeah.
Now, until you understand Dode did this, which it took me over 20 years of study to finally break through and say, this is the answer. You can't put the other pieces into place. So it does require this process of learning and growing so that you develop enough understanding that all the rest of the pieces fit together. It's sort of like, I don't know if you guys both do jigsaw puzzles, but my wife knows that when I start a jigsaw puzzle, I'm a fanatic. But what I do a jigsaw puzzle because of several things. One is I like to frame the issue. I think framing an issue is central to prevailing in any debate. And it's something very few people know how to do, is to frame the issue that's being discussed. Yeah. The second thing is I like systematic approaches. So, I have all these little trays for my jigsaw puzzles, and I put like colors together. After I've put together the frame, I put like colors together.
Good idea.
And ultimately, I will even organize like colors by shape. They have insies and outies on jigsaw puzzles. Yeah. Boy and girl parts, sometimes I call them. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about on jigsaw. Yeah. And so you can have a piece that has 4 insies or 4 outsies or 2 insies and 2 outsies or side by side outsies and insies. I look at the pattern, and then I organize the pieces by pattern, because when I'm putting together the puzzle, if I have 2 insies together, that means I need 2 outsies. Right?
Yeah.
So now I don't have to pick up every piece to see which one goes. I have a group that's organized by that color and by that shape, and I can put it into place. Now, this is the same way I translate, by the way. I am this organized in translating. And then when you put all those pieces together, I work the puzzle for the thrill of getting down to the last 20, 30, or 40 pieces in a 1,000-piece puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because then it's rapid success.
Yeah.
That's where we are.
Yeah.
That's where we have been. Yeah. And now I have this opportunity to hold up this completed picture and puzzle and say, this is God's picture. This is who he is and what he's offering.
Yeah.
Come on. Join me. Be part of it.
Please. Yes.
So that's my metaphor for today. We have been now 2 hours in this program. That probably exceeds.
That's a good 1 hour show to me.
It's a good 1 hour show. We managed to pack. Yes, 2 hours into a 1 hour show.
It's eternal.
I don't know.
Yeah.
1 hour to a 2 hour show. As they say, I would have written you a shorter letter if I had more time. I would have produced a shorter show if I had been more thoughtful. I don't know. It's not our style. It's not Yahweh's style. He likes to be in the moment and to talk to people and to help them grow from where they are to where he would like to see them to be. And I thank you for listening. It's been a wonderful way, gentlemen, to spend the Shabbat. I've had a lovely time with you. I'm hopeful that this time next week we're going to be able to return to material that I have recently translated and commented on in terms of the way that God wants us to respond when there are those who are trying to get in the way of the Malaka, and how he wants us to respond, because he has a lot at stake. He's all in on this particular
I'm betting on him.
Yeah, I am betting on him. And he has very, very clear instructions, and they are really bold on how he wants us to respond. And I'm back to my really simpleton approach. I think we're always in a good position if we do what God wants us to do. So I'm going to share with you what that is.
Let's go with that.
Let's go with that next week. We're going to go with that again. We're a broken record in that regard. We're going to recommend that you follow our example and you do what God wants you to do. And it all leads to a wonderful place. So thank you for listening. Have a wonderful Shabbat, Kevin. And
thank you, Kevin.
Kirk. Yeah, thank you for being here, gentlemen. You're off to my right side. It's lovely to see you. And happy Shabbat. May Yah bless you.
Thank you. Shabbat shalom. Have a good time.